an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Cradle, Book 9, Bloodline, Chapters 3, 4, and 5. In these chapters, I really didn't expect to be heading back to Sacred Valley this soon. I didn't think we'd get there within this section. Everything is happening so fast. I know it's been 9 books, but it feels like it's happening so fast. We thought we had 30 years. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Andy for commissioning this episode. Andy, if you're out there, what's up, what's up, what's up? So, yeah, like I said in the intro, guys, I don't know what I thought. I think I expected there to be some interruptions before we got on the road heading to Sacred Valley. And then I thought there would be interruptions on the road to Sacred Valley. And granted, there are a couple, but it's not like I thought it would be. And we wind up in Sacred Valley by the end of this, fifth chapter. And I'm not ready for it. I'm, completely ready for it. On the one hand, this is what I've wanted for so long. I have been thinking, it's like coming back to, a 10-year reunion. And you were the, nerd loser. And then you, swan in and you are fit, hot, rich, and just fucking have it together. It's that kind of vibe. So, of course, I am absolutely here for it. But I don't know. I expected there to be more ceremony to it. And instead, it feels a lot more, stressful and sinister, which it should. We're dealing with a dread god. So, my idea of it being a high school reunion, obviously, I wasn't really thinking through the circumstances in a logical way. But anyway, Andy is here. Hi, Andy. So, before they get there, Chapter 3, we are on the Cloud Fortress, and I really enjoy this moment where Lyndon is debating whether or not he's, at a level with Yaren that he could just put his arm around her. This is one of those things in a relationship that are always, interesting to navigate, where you have kissed, you've established that you really like each other, you're even, you have a home together now, but he's still worried about maybe overstepping a little bit, and I'm just dude, do you not remember when Ruby saw you and came running up and literally threw her arms and legs around you like a little spider monkey? It's fine. You can put your arm around her. And this is when they talk about whether or not the people from Sacred Valley will listen to him when he tries to warn them. And he says that even if they don't listen to him, he's going to have so much backup that they will have to think that something is going on, which really is a good point. I didn't realize exactly how many people were coming, but he has a tiny army. So that will make an impression, especially considering that they are all golds, which to the people at Sacred Valley, it's going to seem like they're incredibly powerful beyond imagining, And at this point, they talk about the Heaven's Glory School. And he says, I plan to give them a chance. And Yaren's some people, if you throw them a line when they're drowning, they'll just pull you in. And Lyndon had a really good, I feel anyway, a really good middle ground here where he said, he wants to warn them, but they will not be provided escape. It will be up to them to find their way out. I think that's fair. it's, it's very tempting to just be like, well, these people are idiots who are backward and uninformed and ignorant. But as ignorant as one may be, that does not explain the malice with which they have treated practically everyone around them. So I can't be very sorry for them. As much as I have like a little bit of sympathy for their situation overall, they have chosen to be really awful repeatedly, and for like no good reason, just in a quest for power or to prove their superiority. So I'm fine with it. And Lyndon is also struggling with the knowledge that Sacred Valley has a barrier to growth in the first place. He feels like he had assumed it was all just due to their being isolated, and, there was nobody to inform them what was going on, and that was difficult, but he understood it. And now he knows that there is something that's literally like taking power away, and he feels especially like the Akura clan knowing that they're there. He had this talk with Charity, and she made the like analogy with, well, they're like fleas in an armory. And at the time he sort of was like, I kind of see what you mean. But I'll be honest, I didn't really see what she meant in terms of their... The thing about Sacred Valley is, as far as I know, and you guys can feel free to correct me, we don't exactly know why the suppression field is there. Do we? Like, we know that it's something to do with the Dread God, and it's something to do with, like, keeping them safe using this somehow. But I don't think that we have a clear idea of what it's supposed to be accomplishing specifically, and why the Titan wants to go back to Sacred Valley so badly. Because when Lyndon draws power from the Dread God in the last book, that's what's on the Titan's mind, is like, I'll go back home and I'll find the thing that will finally like feed this craving and keep me from being hungry anymore. And I don't know if it's supposed to be that, like, the winter steel that is for some reason more plentiful in Sacred Valley, if that has anything to do with it. But as far as I know, we don't have an explanation. It's like on exactly why the suppression field is there exactly. So because I don't know, I don't feel like I have an opinion on how the Akura clan should have handled this, because I'm not sure if there is a very specific reason. I am not sure why, like, what they know about it, I assume Malice is fully aware of everything regarding the circumstances of Sacred Valley, but that's just an assumption. And truly, there seems to be a fair amount in this universe that is hidden from various people. So, let's see. Minloy says, it's been mentioned that its brother is in the labyrinth. Okay. So Austin says, I think a Dread God is imprisoned there. Okay, so imprisoned being the key word. So that is because the others, there have been Dread Gods, but they weren't imprisoned. They were just asleep, and we didn't want to wake them. But so the implication is that there is a Dread God there that is not asleep so much as being held in place. Which, that brings the question to me, why does the Titan want to go to Sacred Valley? Is the Titan under the impression that it can eat the other god? Because I would think they would be competing for resources, and that wouldn't be super great. And also, like, there's a mention when Dross is talking to Lyndon later, and Lyndon's commenting on how bad Sky's Edge looks. And fucking Dross says, it could be worse. There could be 2 Dread Gods. And I was like, okay, Mr. White, stop it. I know what you're going to do. dick. So, anyway, this is when he has the talk with Yaren, and she basically tells him, don't kill a bunch of Jades. She's like, look, I fucking hate all of those people that poisoned and betrayed my master for absolutely no reason. They just hated him because he had power. That was like it. But they are essentially children compared to us, and there's just nothing, there's no point or sport or justice to it, so don't do it. And I really appreciated this, him being surprised and being like, I thought that I was going to have to talk to you about that. I just really liked them having this conversation at all. And she says, they're not worth half a glance from me, and I'll be dead and buried before I give them more than they deserve. And that's a really good attitude, you know? They say that living well is the best revenge, and the whole point of that is you make it seem as if the person that you are trying to get back at isn't actually the point. You focus on yourself. And it honestly, there's a reason why that's a bit of a saying, because it can be effective. Sometimes people just want to know that they're getting to you, and that you like are that you're living in their head, and or they're living in your head, I guess. And the best way to do it is just to be like, I am so far above this that it doesn't even touch me. So they have their kiss again. Lyndon and Yaren, I'm like, really, I have to assume that Will White isn't going to be writing a sex scene. I don't want one. I'm good. But I do enjoy them beginning to be more like affectionate with each other. And they decide to go on a tour of the cloud ship because they haven't had a chance yet. They've been like so focused. And fucking Ethan, he is first distracts them, which we find out is because there are some people hiding on the ship with them. And then he invites himself to the tour. And they're doing this while Charity is figuring out whether it's clear for them to go through this portal at Sky's Edge. She says, when I give the all clear, follow. Only fly where I direct you, but accelerate as quickly as you can. The Titan has more tempting targets, but if he does notice you, I will send you back through the portal immediately. This is when Dross says something about 2 dread gods. So, they go through, and Lyndon, first of all, is noticing that the spatial travel feels a little bit different now that his awareness has broadened. And secondly, Sky's Edge looks like completely ripped apart. It's very, very, like, he's just, I think, been a little bit unprepared for how bad things have been getting. But anyway, I need to keep myself on track here, guys. I'm sorry, because there's so much to get through, and I always go over. So, yeah, this is when he says the town was gone. The landscape was unrecognizable, chunks blown from surrounding mountains and ravines carved into the ground. And then they see the kneeling dread god, and it's not even completely up out of the water yet. It's like very slowly getting to its feet, and they pass by it. And Lyndon has a moment of being like, oh, we totally got past it. We totally, managed to bypass it. And then it stands up and cycles its Madra. And that's literally all it does. It cycles its Madra. The protective script screamed as they resisted an invisible assault, the projection construct fuzzing into chaos so that Lyndon could no longer see what was behind them. They were under attack. He couldn't believe they survived a hit, but that wasn't all the Dread God could do. When the projection construct recovered, it showed them the Titan again. It had turned a bit to its right, taking one long, slow stride. The Dread God hadn't noticed them at all. It had only cycled its Madra for a brief instant. That was no more threatening than taking a breath. They had taken casualties from the dread god doing nothing. Which, that is a real bit of, what's the word I want? Perspective. That is a real, piece of evidence that we can use to really understand what this thing is capable of. Because we had the whole bleeding phoenix, but that had been countered by a monarch, and we didn't really see the direct result of being near it. Because I really think that probably, had they gotten close the way they do with this one, at the stage they had been at, maybe they would have died, But yeah, the Bleeding Phoenix, they just don't really get up close and personal with in the same way. So we needed a bit of context here to understand just how completely powerless they are going to be. This thing is no joke. And that's why I'm not loving the hints that there's going to be 2 of them. I just don't really look forward to that or want that or need that in any way, just for the record. So, this is when, in chapter 4, we really start heading to Sacred Valley at speed. And Lyndon is impatient and really needing something to take his mind off of things, and this is when they take the tour. And Mercy is here. She is surprising them. I sort of thought when Mercy popped up that maybe Pride would be with her, but no. It's just her, and Zeal also wants to get included on this tour. And Mercy, I had expected also, because Lyndon's like, I thought your family would need you right now. And she says, Pride made it clear that he doesn't really need me around. And I really want to know what Malice thinks of this. Because whether Pride says he needs you around, that's not really the point. It's meant to be that you are the one, that's in charge essentially right now. So I wouldn't think that Pride's opinion or what he thinks he needs should have anything to do with it. I would expect that to be utterly irrelevant. But I think she's just sort of trying to rationalize why this last trip is no problem, So, yeah, I just feel I had the same sort of reaction to her presence here as Lyndon, because I was just like, this seems like a bad time for her to be leaving the family. So, let's see. Evil says, we will learn, don't worry. Okay, but no, don't give me any spoilers about what we're gonna know about, though. Just, avoid that, guys, because I trust the books. I'm not trying to complain about it. I'm just saying, what I'm, thinking. And sometimes I don't want to know that we know or find out or anything, or maybe we don't, and it won't be till the next book. Just don't just keep off limits. Just saying. So this is when Dross does a little bit of his power flex, where Zeal wants to be let in to go on this tour, and Dross doesn't want to let him in. I alone have the power to determine his fate. It feels good. What do you call that? Megalomania? Ethan suggested. Oh, I like that word. Let's go with that. Dross, I love you, buddy. I really do. So, at this point, we have the general, here's the bathroom, here's the kitchen sort of vibe, except much more supernatural and badass. There is something about the name of the place first, and they decided to call it Windfall because it was something that came as a result of good fortune. And I thought that was actually a really good name, and everybody has sort of an opinion on it. And this is the thing with naming anything. I'm certain when you have kids, you go through this same feeling where, anytime you tell people what you're going to name your child, they're going to have a reaction. And people have their own baggage surrounding certain names or associations, and it's just, you're never going to make anybody happy. So in my opinion, the fact that him and Yaren like it is all that matters, and I think Windfall is a perfectly good name. I think it's actually somewhat clever. And Ethan makes a joke about naming it Ethan's Rest, and is mad that they didn't consult with him about what to name it, considering that he's part of this island. And Yaren is like, if you want to detach from our piece of the island and go off on your own, you're free to name your shit whatever you want. And I was like, I love you so much, girl. And then when he suggests Ethan's Rest, she like jabs at him with the sword. And Ethan's like, okay, look, what's the deal? Because you know I'm teasing. Why are you... And she says, I don't know, you're just fucking annoying me, like, way more than normal. And he says, Ruby? And she says, her too. So that's interesting. How much can Yaren tell? Like, her and Ruby are the same. They're one now. So when she says her too, is that her joking around and just being like, yeah, no, I mean, I am definitely annoyed. Ruby is also annoyed. Like, it's both of us. Or is that her being like, I can sense Ruby's annoyance because I can feel her separately from myself in a way inside of me. I don't know. I have to assume it's the first one, and she's just being kind of sarcastic about it. Like, oh, it's definitely not all Ruby, you know? But we haven't gotten a POV from Yaren yet for this book, and I am extremely interested in hearing how she's feeling about everything, because as we see later, due to their fusing, things are much harder for her when we get to Sacred Valley, and the suppression field affects her a lot more than anybody else because she is so reliant on her spirit that she has absorbed as a piece of her physical body in a way that it isn't for other people. So that's just very compelling. And they sort of wonder out loud, I think it's Zeal who says, if you had had a more solid foundation before you advanced and fused together, if you had like reached, I think he says if you'd reached Archlord already, because she was an Overlord, but she hadn't reached Archlord, which was like sort of the suggestion before she fused with Ruby. And she skips that because she's telling Ruby in that scene, that's because the previous sacred artists have always been fighting their blood shadow, but we both want the same thing, so we don't have to worry. But it seems like that might not be entirely true. Like, they can be... both things can be true. They can want the same thing and not fight and successfully fuse, but still be kind of skipping a step and putting themselves at risk long term due to choosing to jump ahead a bit too quickly. So I'm interested to see like what winds up happening there with not only with the suppression field and how she copes with that, but whether or not it has any long-term effects, or if she manages to find a way to cope, maybe some element of a different type of advancement that might help. So here we come to the miniature mountain that is going to be Lyndon's aura source that has fire and destruction aura. And then there's a cave filled with razor-sharp, silvery protrusions like teeth. The air glistened with sword aura, but as Yaren saw it, her face fell. Bleed me, I'm going to need a source of blood aura now. And I thought Yaren had been given a source of blood aura by the Blood Sage in the last book. I didn't, can those be consumed? I had sort of expected this to be something that lasted, but maybe she just cycled all of it and it's gone now. I had just seen it as something that was sort of a permanent, and it would always be a source. But I'm wondering if maybe it does have a limit, and she, having her month after he gave it to her before her fight with Sephara, wound up cycling it all. Min says the blood gem is crystallized blood madra. Evil says it was a treasure, not a source. Huh. Okay. So it's like a glass of water versus an ocean. I wonder what you could get for like permanent blood madra in a location the way that this cave and volcano, like, the whole thing that Ethan suggests is just like, oh, just kill somebody every time you need to cycle blood aura. And then comes Lyndon talking about an orris tree native to Sacred Valley. And he's in the midst of talking about like how excited he is to eventually try it. And it's clear he sees this as sort of like a sacred thing that needs a special occasion. And then he hears a crunching and Zeal has just taken a bite of a fruit without even asking. And Lyndon is tempted to be upset and very quickly is like, well, I am the host and I didn't say not to take one. And I'm like, Lyndon, I love you so much, buddy, because you are just so much more patient than me. And you're in the right. Like, you got to be chill because, the way that the culture is set up here, I feel like that is how to handle it. But you just don't fuck with my food, everyone. If I'm telling you about how excited I am to eventually eat this thing, and you tear the bag open and dig it in front of me, we're going to have some words. And it's not going to be pretty. And I'm going to feel a way about you for a while after that. I'm not going to forgive you very quickly. It's just how I am. You just don't fuck with people's food. And I just, that was one of the first things when Owen and I went on our very first date. We went to IHOP and I ordered something and he like grabbed a piece off my plate and I like stopped and said, okay, I know that you didn't know this, but I'm telling you now, don't do that ever again without asking or I will stab my fork into your hand. We have to draw boundaries and understand each other. And I'm making this clear to you. I hate that so much. And to be fair, he has never done it since. He 100% listened to me and I appreciated it. So this is, when like Ethan explains Lyndon's plan to add a soulsmith foundry to this open space. And Lyndon had never said anything about that out loud. So he's feeling a bit of a weirdness that Ethan knows. And in my opinion, I'm like, hey, Lyndon, no offense, but that's not really a leap. Everybody knows that you like to soulsmith and there's a big open spot of people are going to know that's what you intend to do. And also a little spot for little Blue to play around where there are some naturally born Sylvan River seeds. And everybody's like, oh, you gave her a place to play. And it's very clear that Lyndon just built this for the soul smithing of those Sylvan River seeds. He wasn't thinking in terms of little Blue. So he feels a little bit embarrassed that they assume it was for her benefit. And it doesn't seem like that was how he was thinking at all. And Ethan feeds them all like Madra, forged Madra. And Zeal is looking at the herb garden and realizing that this is where Ethan got a lot of the ingredients for the elixir that helped him out. Now, question, how healed is Zeal? I feel like Ethan talked about this earlier, but I have forgotten now. I am assuming that whatever he was fed takes time to really begin to sink into him because there's this exhaustion to him still. But that exhaustion could very well just be his personality. I've been sort of putting it down to the spiritual damage, but I don't know whether that's true or not. So I'm assuming it's going to take some time. And it's the sort of thing, there was another gift that he was given when he was in the tournament that also from, I think, Emrys Silentborn. And it's a similar thing where he was saying to himself, like, this is going to take a while, but it will help. Let's see, Min says, Ethan growing his little army, I wonder if they will all develop to look like him since they ate his Madra. That's interesting. Because, he was the one who enforced Little Blue with Soulfire, but she didn't wind up looking like him at all, and he was surprised by that. So I wonder if it's just the first person who feeds them, the one who cares for them the most. How does that work? So this is when Lyndon asks about the garden. Ethan turns it back around and is like, Lyndon, I'm sure we would all rather hear about the scripts that you have built into the cloud ship. And just as he begins to explain the scripts, Ethan threw up a hand. Oh no, danger. We'll have to pick this up some other time. And I didn't realize it until we were like, partway through the scene. But what this is meant to be is that Lyndon's about to lecture everybody on something that nobody is really interested in except for him. And Ethan knew they were going to get interrupted, and so he decided to put Lyndon on the spot so that it wouldn't be him getting interrupted instead. And I really love Yaren being a good partner and attempting to be interested in what Lyndon's talking about because she wants to support him. And he can tell she doesn't really care, and he's like, never mind. And everybody bails. And then finally, Zeal is the only one left, and he says, I'd like to hear about the scripts. And Lyndon's like, oh, thank you. I mean, I think everybody has been in a position like this. We all have our own weird little interests that are very specific that other people don't care about. And when you find one person who not only cares but can understand the extent of what you're talking about, it's really nice. For me, it's cooking. I went to pastry and baking school. I love to cook besides just baking. And I know a lot about it. And I have a lot of experience and like to experiment with things. But when I try and talk about cooking to people, people don't care the way that I care, or they don't even understand what I'm trying to say sometimes. And it's always really fun to come across somebody who understands and has their own ideas or things they've experimented with. So anyway, yeah, we all have our thing. The other one for me is planners, but I've fallen off planners over this past year because 2020 just fucked all of our shit right up. So this is when they decide to use these birds as a sort of testing ground for their new abilities. Toxic green leathery birds that trailed a dull fog. The birds and trails gave off a powerful sensation of venom madra. So this is kind of interesting. First of all, of course, we have Mercy, who is very concerned over how intelligent these birds are. And Ethan has to reassure her, not only are they not intelligent, but they're mean in order to get her feeling okay with targeting them. And she manages to take down 34 in her first shot and thinks that she can get up to 50 next time using this arrow technique. Let's see. The arrow whipped up a whirlwind, tearing up the grass as it blasted through the air. The sunlight flickered in its wake as though the missile stained the air with darkness. When the arrow impacted the flock, it tore a hole in the mass of birds. Then it exploded into dark tendrils. Strings of shadow lashed out from where they'd been compressed into the arrow. This is dope. Fucking Mercy's power. I love the creepiness of it, juxtaposed with her sunny, positive demeanor. It's just such a beautiful contrast, and it's very good. This is very, very good. All of it. And then we get Yaren, and she makes it clear how she's just been dying to try some shit. So then we get something that's pretty interesting and a little bit saddening to me. Let's see, the technique she was trying to form is the final sword, but it was rougher, less controlled than it had been before. Not only had they developed it as a pure sword technique, but she had lost the connection to the sword icon that had made the technique possible before. Ruby had figured out a version of the final sword with her blood madra, but it had always been weaker than Yaren's. It looked like now Yaren was compensating for her lack of experience in the aspect with pure, overwhelming power, which basically manifests as such force that everybody around her is being sort of pressed back by it. Even Ethan is sort of like, girl, do you want to chill? And other cloud ships around them fall back in reaction to the intensity of what she's doing, which Lyndon notices later. And I feel really sad because she was like getting comfortable with this particular method. And now she's going to have to relearn so much due to the change in relationship to the icon, you know? And I really sympathize with her. It's like, I don't know. It's sort of like Lyndon having lost his arm. And like, yeah, the new tool that he gets with this new arm is going to be incredibly valuable and winds up it being sort of a boon in the end. But initially, you just have to like relearn a bunch of shit that you took for granted a bit. And that's always hard and feels really disorienting. So the fact that she decides to compensate with pure power is no surprise, because like in book 5, Ghostwater, we see her trying to cut like a couple of leaves floating in the air with her endless sword. And she's thinking about how her master could cut a single page out of a closed book. But when she does it, shit gets absolutely shredded. Yaren's problem has never been amassing force and power. It's always been fine control. That's always been the thing that's been a bit of a struggle for her. So it looks like this is just the same thing for her, but writ large. And then her like walking into the suppression field, I don't know, maybe the fact that she won't be able to physically rely, or not physically, technically rely on sheer power because of that field will force her to become a lot more precise. Maybe it'd be like a good thing for her training in some ways, but I don't know. So, let's see. Ethan ran a comb through his messy hair. That, ladies and gentlemen, illustrates the strength of heralds. While sages focus their willpower outside of themselves to make changes to the world directly, heralds focus it inwardly. They enhance their own power beyond all limitations. Which is interesting. And I keep thinking, too, about how we were told that the 8-Man Empire they're like the only group of people who has ever managed to combine a sage and a herald to create a monarch-like strength, because many people have attempted it, and it's always ended in tragedy. And I keep thinking, like, is that going to happen with Lyndon and Yaren? Are they both going to individually ascend? Are they going to combine and ascend in a way together? Or, like, and would I mind that? I don't know. Part of me wants them to be ascending together. Each of them separately, I guess, is really what I mean. I want them both to be able to, you know, become monarchs in their own right. But also, there is something sort of sweet about their power being linked to one another in that way. I just don't know how limiting that would be. So, this is, of course, when Lyndon's like, oh, so fusing with your remnant. And with that tone in his voice that Lyndon gets when he's thinking about fucking trying something that's not wise, you know? Remember when Lyndon first found out about Yaren's blood shadow and his instinct was immediately like, ooh, I wonder how hard it is to get a blood shadow. Like, there's a minute where Lyndon's thinking about it because he always wants to try a thing. He's just very, very eager to throw himself into shit. So, this is when Mercy asks, Lyndon, why are you still an Underlord? And it turns out that he is pretty certain he can ascend at any time. But that Charity told him that the suppression field around Sacred Valley is of a type of power that will have more of an effect on him the further he goes. And he has decided to wait to move forward until after he's out of there because he doesn't want it to, you know, completely drain away from him. So Austin says, Lyndon is what my idea of a good Slytherin would be. Austin, I like it. I think that's a really great example. Because so much of the time when we talk about ambition, it's linked with negative connotations. Ambitious is not often used as a positive, which it absolutely can be. I would consider myself a really ambitious person. And, you know, Lyndon is greedy. That's part of his whole thing. He's got, like, the Hunger Madra deal with the black flame and the arm that fucking siphons power out of people. His whole thing is constantly wanting more. And honestly, I'm not mad at that. That's like the fucking human condition. And he's never really willing to hurt people in a way they don't either deserve or require for his own survival. He's not an asshole about it, but he's very practical. So I respect it. Gotta respect the game. So all of these birds, by the way, that Yaren focuses on, all but one die, and that one is like, bye, and just turns around in midair and hikes it the fuck away. So, hightails it. That's the one I wanted. So, Mercy and Yaren, they head off to check on the other ships, and Lyndon is left by himself to try and exercise his will. And he does that hold. And we've seen this before. Northstrider did this at Ghostwater and kept, you know, all of the cracks from continuing to spread so that he could go in with the tree and everything. And he manages to hold it for just a second, and then it sort of escapes him again. And Lyndon says that he doesn't know how to practice. And Ethan explains the theory behind all of this. And he talks about physical law being at the bottom of a building with a lot of floors. And he says physical laws aren't less complex, and it does form the basis for everything. But everything above it gets, like, is superseding that. The whole thing with Madra is that it gives us a tool to override physical laws. Soulfire is the staircase between the Madra system and the next level up, at which we exert our wills to control the world directly. This is the level on which you and Yaren now operate. While she enhanced her ability to add willpower to her own actions, you can take actions that you previously could not. And Lyndon's like, how... I mean, I had figured out a lot of this, but how do you know? And Ethan tells him about how he was an advisor to Tiberian Aurelius, which most of us had already sort of figured that out. And Lyndon's just sort of mystified as to how he could have been an advisor when he was only an underlord to a monarch. Like, what? And Ethan says, I have always had an instinctive grasp on the underlying theory behind the sacred arts. They found early on that I could handle dream tablets far beyond my age or advancement level, and that I could draw from them more insight than anyone else. And I'm really curious about why this is. Is Ethan as far down the line a descendant of Osriel as it seems like? Is he Osriel himself? I really think that Osriel is still alive out there. Suriel seems to believe that. So part of me keeps thinking, but that's too easy. I don't know. But yeah, there's a whole thing, like a whole sense of him being different than the rest of the members of his family. I mean, he's one of the few remaining that even has this bloodline ability at all. But beyond that, there's just something separate about him. There's something separate about each of them, to be honest. I mean, I don't know about Yaren in terms of how things would have gone if she had grown up like in her village. But she says that she was a prodigy among her people. It's only Lyndon that's the opposite. You know, Mercy's a prodigy too. Lyndon's the only one that was the runt. He was the only one that wasn't keeping up with anybody, never mind striving ahead of everybody. So, yeah. And Ethan asks Lyndon, you can tell the others, but please just don't tell everybody else about it, because my kinsmen don't even know that I was his advisor. Which is fascinating to me, because I had sort of assumed, we know that Ethan blames himself for what happened to the Aurelius family and the monarch. He definitely feels that it was his words and actions that made everything fall apart and caused Tiberius to make a choice that he may not have made if Ethan wasn't whispering in his ear. But I had assumed that Ethan's family knew that, and that they had just sort of come to terms. I didn't realize that they didn't know. And that worries me, because what are they going to think if they find out how much he had to do with it? I don't know. I'm worried about him. So, and this is, of course, when we get the wonderful quote, which I actually put on my Facebook today, about I really like it when people can look past who I am inside and appreciate my gorgeous exterior, which is just excellent. So then we go to chapter 5, and we get information about the birth of the Mad King. King Daruman I was not only the ruler who united his iteration, but who ushered it into an unprecedented golden age. As a warrior, he was unparalleled, bringing his sword against the planet eaters that plagued his people. As a king, he was known both for his wisdom and his character. And basically, we get a summary of all of his actions, how revered he was, how much he really seemed to deserve that reverence. Everything about his actions and intentions fell in line with one another. There is no implication here that he was being dishonest in any of his behaviors or actions. It was all for the good of the people, seeking right, trying to provide for people and to take care of those who couldn't care for themselves. And eventually, the Abaddon elevate him and give him worlds to improve. And he gets put on a team called the Executors. He was an agent of the Abaddon, but unbound to the Eladari Pact, so he was not prevented from interfering in fate. Which means that the fact they can interfere in fate means that they don't have a clear-cut future. So the hounds were not able to see what was going to happen. And thus all of their actions begin to... They come as complete surprises, because nobody is able to predict anything that's coming with them. When the first executor fled Abaddon control and took over a distant iteration, the hounds were shocked. When the second gave up and lay down her weapon with no warning, they became alarmed. They enacted new restrictions on their remaining 3 executors, as well as more extensive screening. But by nature of their role, executors were beyond Abaddon monitoring while on assignment. The third executor burned to the ground the world he was meant to save, insisting there was no other way to be rid of corruption. Daruman chased down that peer himself, performing the execution with his own sword. So, eventually, we get to the point that there are no executors left, and Daruman is the only one that's out here still trying to, keep the game going and help people and assist with different worlds. And they get to a point where he goes up against this, being, a class 2 fiend. And it's more than he bargained for. He determined the only way to truly remove Othkameth was to seal the fiend inside a vessel capable of resisting its temptation, himself. Daruman returned to Sanctum and reported to the judges the successful completion of his mission. He invited them to inspect him for any signs of chaotic control. He was still in command of himself, and he could turn the powers of a Class 1 fiend to good. The Court of Seven, unable to read his fate, nevertheless knew that no one could resist the machinations of a Class 1 fiend forever. They weren't even certain he hadn't already been corrupted. So they imprisoned him for centuries until eventually he escapes, which has literally never happened before. And he fights Machiel and defeats him. And Machiel suffers damage to the origin of his existence that would eventually cause him to pass on his mantle. Which is pretty wild. Daruman declared the Abaddon tyrants and swore himself to their destruction. He gathered up his original iteration, forging it into the greatest fortress, Tal Galore, and moved to another world. The people were all that mattered to the way, he said, not the iterations themselves. The Abaddon were nothing more than jailers, and he would gather power until he brought them down. I am so interested. I really am. Because here's the thing. We know Ethan is up to something Roshir-esque, is my vibe. Ethan doesn't like the current system setup. And I don't know if he is against the Abaddon, against the monarchs of his own, but it feels like he aims to take down Abaddon or change things fundamentally because of the way that he has talked in other books. And I am just really curious how he would feel about this whole situation. And the Mad King, it's the sort of thing where on the one hand, one could say, oh yeah, he broke out and declared them tyrants because of the influence of the thing that he sealed inside himself. But they also treated him pretty unjustly after, what seems to be like thousands of years of service. And I can't blame him for being resentful of that. So I don't know how much of it is due to the thing in him. And how much maybe he eventually caved to the thing in him because he began to realize that maybe the Abaddon weren't entirely right about things. I don't know. But the whole thing with the Abaddon, I feel that we've been sort of having slowly revealed to us, is that Suriel is like the best of them. And as we learn more about the overall system of the Abaddon, it becomes more and more clear that they are not as a unit. First of all, they're not a monolith in the first place. And secondly, a lot of them are just as shitty and petty as human beings. The elevation does not change their morality necessarily. It's, there's a lot of talk about who's going to ascend in the last book because all of the monarchs are sort of being pressured, and they are going to be willing to take Rhaegon Shen, evidently, who is the shadiest character in the universe. And if they were willing to take him, then they don't seem that picky. I was thinking that Daruman, is that the name of the Mad King before he gets pulled up? I like the story about how he is just such a good and decent person that he gets recruited was how I had interpreted it to go always. But it seems like that actually isn't how they operate. And so the Abaddon begin to look less and less angelic and more like a Greek pantheon of gods that have personalities and grievances and grudges that they are too human to be able to operate on the level that they do. And what's his face, the rat-faced one from the last book, he's like trying to make deals with Yaren to use the arrow on North Strider just because he personally doesn't like Northstrider. Meanwhile, Northstrider is one of the few genuinely decent monarchs. But this guy just doesn't like him and really encourages Yeren to kill Northstrider instead. Just, it's made very clear that goodness is not a requirement to becoming one of them. So I'm starting to fucking side with the Vroshir a little bit, I thought that the Abaddon were agents of good and order, but it seems like only a few of them take that very seriously. So anyway, yeah, it's just a bit of a bummer. So this is when we reach Mount Samara, and I only have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to have to speed it up. But it's not even that they reach it. They see Mount Samara. And Lyndon starts to get a little bit teary-eyed. And I really, that is what happens, isn't it? You go back to some place you haven't been in a long time after you've gone through a lot. It's wild. It's very weird to see. Not only, it's like going back to your old school and everything's small. You remember these giant hallways and these doors, and then you go in and it's small and cramped and old, and you're like, wow, I really didn't remember this clearly. And let's see, the aura was starting to fade already. Lyndon's spiritual sense couldn't penetrate far beyond this point, and he was having to spend more and more energy to keep their cloud base afloat. Next to him, Athen shuddered. It's like diving face first into a bucket of ink. I'm afraid my bloodline legacy won't be of much use to you from here on, although I myself will be the same emotional asset and source of courage, as always. So, and Zeal says it'll be more uncomfortable than you think. Because Zeal would know, wouldn't he? And they head out, and Yeren collapses. And it turns out, like I said earlier, her bonding with her blood shadow has made her more vulnerable to the kind of draw that this boundary, exerts on power. And they had all sort of been, I think, picturing it as almost like a veil, a suppression. But instead, like I said, it's pulling power off of them, which is a whole different feel and makes me concerned when they walk out of Sacred Valley again. They bounce back, right? Because I'm just we're not just accidentally going to just turn ourselves back into fucking jades, are we? And even the aura is so thin here. Lyndon's remembering how he was almost blinded by the aura when he first was able to get his copper sight. And then he opens his eyes here, and some of the aura, Dross says, is thinner because of the Titan, but really that's just how it is here. And Lyndon is just realizing how weak the area is. It's slowing down their clouds because they draw on aura, and there isn't enough. So everything is functioning less efficiently, and it's just really startling. So they head in, and they get stopped. There's a spot where they expect to run into some guards, and there's nobody there. And Lyndon's sort of what the fuck? And they keep moving forward. And eventually they get stopped by the dude who had guarded the lesser treasure hall, which I think is where Lyndon asks to go later on. Oh no, that's not him. They run into him later. The first person that they meet is just, some Heaven's Glory iron, I think. But he asks whether they're exiles from the Wei clan, which understandably gets Lyndon's attention. And when Elder Rom shows up and Lyndon's tell me what the fuck's going on with the Wei clan, Rom will not give him a straight answer, and I was just so irritated. Just tell him what the fuck is happening. And I guess that the propaganda about the Wei clan really took root, because everybody seems to... We see later that evidently the Wei clan did indeed, like, execute an attack and fucked some buildings up and whatnot. I am assuming this is all under the guidance of probably a combo of, like, Chai Long and Orthos. But the reason that they do this is because they're trying to, I think, get Lyndon's mother and then escape Sacred Valley. And it seems like they are stopped from escaping and have to retreat back into the valley. So Lyndon, like, he can't get a straight answer out of Elder Rom. Elder Rom is really bitter. He doesn't have, you know, he's not being a good sport about this. He's just like, oh, it's fucking you. I should take your hand off, but it looks like somebody fucking cut your whole arm off, so haha. He's really, really snotty. And Lyndon, eventually, they, like, drag him up closer to the school. This is when Lyndon gets a look at how fucked up the whole place is and how many buildings are just straight up missing. There's a bunch of construction to fix everything going on. And they get interrupted by this woman who immediately sends her strikers to attack them, like with what would have been a lethal attack had they been ordinary sacred artists, like, you know, that Sacred Valley would be used to. And eventually, let's see, here it is. In a flash, Yeren vanished. She reappeared next to the Jade Woman, blade drawn, its white edge pressed against the Elder's throat. And when Lyndon tries to tell them, we're not here to hurt you, we're here to warn you, she asks, what reason do I have to think this isn't a plot to destroy us? Because we don't need a plot to destroy you, Lyndon said simply. He kept his spirit wide open, his madra cycling slowly. And I was like, oh, this is what I've been waiting for. It's not as good as Lyndon's family finding out. That's what I'm really looking forward to. But it is really good stuff to see the Heaven's Glory School begin to scrape and bow because they realize how fucking powerful he is. I'm all about it. And of course, she doesn't have any context, so she thinks they're all golds. And Yeren and Athan are just like, in your bra. I doubt it. We're a lot higher than that. So this is when Lyndon brings up going to the treasure hall. And she says, I'm sure there's nothing in there that would catch the eye of a gold. And Lyndon is pinching his void key and is like, no, that's fine. And I just can't help but think, Lyndon, I am certain nothing in there is going to be up to your standards at this point. You have seen some wildly valuable shit. You have been in places like Nightwheel Valley where aura is just fucking manifesting all over the place and you can harvest it like it's nothing. You built a cannon in like the 10 minutes that you were flying on a mission with, what was it, Narusea? I think was the one that was with him in the last book, and fire it, and then just like all the pieces just disperse. And you, like, in the description, we know that cannon he builds should take weeks. But because he has dross and he is so advanced in so many other ways, he can literally build it on the fly, fire it, and then it's, you know, been used up, and he can just toss it to the side. You built that in minutes. Nothing in the treasure hall of your old home is going to be anything to you anymore, man. Like, I get why he feels excited in theory, but I really want him to stop and think about what shit he saw the first time he was there and how he'd feel about any of it now. You know? The one thing that he could probably still use, and he said that he missed a little, is a parasite ring. And it doesn't even seem like the parasite rings are particularly rare. It like outside of Sacred Valley, he probably, if he thought of it now, he would just go buy one. Like, I don't think it would, he might be able to make one for all I know. So he's just got this idea in his head that he's going to go in there and have all of these goodies. And I'm just like, man, brace yourself, because you think you're going to be like walking into the cheese and beer section of a Whole Foods. And instead you're walking into like the corner package store. You know, it's just going to be very disappointing. So I hope he braces himself for that, because he doesn't seem to be thinking that way. So anyway, I am going to wrap up. I'm over time as usual, but thank you again so much to Andy for commissioning this, and to all of you for hanging out with me and feeding me info. I appreciate you all. I'm so excited to read more. I'm so excited. So I will see you all at the same time Tuesday. And until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.